Good morning. Time for a morning edition of Mornings with Stanley. Stanley's tail just knocked over my phone and now I think I'm crooked. Oh well, who cares? I'm not going to worry about it today. Lucy, here she comes. She was in here just a minute ago and then she left and now she's back. So good. Two good dogs wishing we'd go for a walk, and again I got up too late to do it. Anyway, then I couldn't find my keys. I have two sets of keys, my personal keys and the church keys. And the church keys were in my pocket because after I get home, I usually just leave them. And I threw my pants over this quilt rack and they fell on the other side. But I didn't think about that until that they fell on the floor. So I finally found them. After saying my prayer to St. Anthony. Have you ever told you the story of St. Anthony? You know, the patron saint of lost things. And back when I was a few years ago, I went to a spiritual retreat. We're supposed to do a spiritual retreat or some kind of spiritual formation every year in our conference and Methodist conference. And so a church member I had and our choir director actually in Heiko, he was from the same part of Missouri where my grandparents grew up. In fact, he lived in his last teaching job before moving to Texas he was a high school teacher, was at Mansfield, Missouri, which is more famous because that's where Laura Ingalls Wilder ended up living the last years of her last decades of her life. In fact, they were members of the Methodist Church there in Mansfield, where he was choir director and piano player. Anyway, that's in, I don't remember, I think Wright County, and it's just north, maybe about 15 miles north of Ava, which is a community where my grandparents, they lived near Ava. Ava was just the town that they would have gone to do their shopping. They were farmers east of Ava. Anyway, in Douglas County, and once at choir practice, the choir director, Matt, was talking about this monastery in Douglas County, Missouri. And I was like, Douglas County, that's where my grandparents are from. And it turned out that there was a monastery, a Catholic monastery, that had been there for, I guess, since about the 50s, maybe. I can't remember exactly. And maybe even earlier than that. But and I thought, well, maybe I could do a spiritual retreat at this Catholic monastery. And I'm trying to remember, why did I start this story? Anyway, so I went to this Catholic, the St. Anthony thing. And one year, I went there like 3 years in a row and actually met some of my some of my cousins, second cousins. My dad was very close to one of his cousins, Elmer, who he actually lived with Elmer when he was in college, Elmer and his wife, and got to know their oldest daughter, Nina, who I met, was just a child when my dad lived with them and babysat for them a lot. So she had great memories of my dad. And but once I was there, and it was a Sunday morning, I'd been there for a week, and I got there, I think, on a Monday, and I was like, I was ready. I'd spent all this time doing the monastery thing, praying with the priests, the monks, and everything, and I thought, I want to go be with my people, and I was going to go to the Methodist church in town, in Ava, and I couldn't find my wallet. I could not find my wallet. And I looked all over. I looked in the room. I looked in my car. I hadn't been in my car, but I'd gone for a walk that morning. I went all the way up and down the highway looking to see if it had fallen out of my pocket or something. I couldn't find it. I went to, I waited for the church service to be over. They have an early morning prayer service, but on Sundays they have, and then it's usually followed by Mass. But on Sundays, they have their Mass later, and people in the community can come and worship at the monastery. And so I waited for that service to be over. By then, it was too late for me to go to the Methodist church. But while I was waiting for the church service to be over, or I waited, and then afterwards, this guy said, "Have we ever prayed to St. Anthony?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Well, once I lost my wallet, and I prayed to St. Anthony, and I opened my dresser drawer, and there it was." And so I said a prayer to St. Anthony, and I went to my room, and I opened the drawer, and evidently it had fallen from on top of the dresser to the drawer when it had been opened, and there was my wallet. But it was too late to go to church. Whoa, sorry, Stanley, I didn't mean to knock you over. Anyway, so I did say a little short prayer to St. Anthony about my keys, and I found my keys not long after that. I don't know what you think about praying to saints. I will say that when I had the house in Wichita Falls, someone told me what you need to do is get a St. Joseph, which is Joseph, the father of Jesus, who raised Jesus anyway, and he's a carpenter, and you bury him upside down in your yard, and your house will sell. Well, I tried that and it didn't work. So St. Joseph didn't work for me, but St. Anthony has worked for me on several occasions. So anyway, if you ever lose something, you might say a prayer to St. Anthony, and maybe you'll find it pretty soon after that. Okay. I ordered these new boots. I don't know why I click on things on the internet, but this thing, it's supposed to improve your style. And I got these boots and I like them, but they're kind of bright. These kind of, I don't know what color, they're very bright colored. I think they might be a little too bright for me. They stand out. Oh, well, they're comfortable, I guess. They're hard to put on. I didn't realize the boots, these kind of lace-up boots, would be so difficult to put on and take off. I'm used to just shoes you just slip on and slip off. I don't think I was made to be hip. I was not made to be in style. Usually when I come into style, like shaving my head, which was not intentional, but usually I do that about 5 years after it's gone out of style, or maybe not 5 years after, but right when it's about to go out of style. And that's when it did. So in about 4 or 5 years, when the beard craze is just about over, I'll grow a beard. Here is our reading for week 40. Oh, I wanted to say one other thing. Yesterday, I mentioned the woman who had invited me to be a part of that 4 chaplain ceremony. And I called her name, I said her name was Marty Parks, but it's actually Marty Peters. So Marty, if you happen to watch this, I apologize for calling you the wrong name yesterday. Here is, and thank you again for letting me be a part of that service. It was really an honor. Here is our reading today is Galatians chapter 3, verses 2 through 5, our gospel reading, our scripture reading. The only thing I want to learn from you is this: did you receive the Spirit by doing the works of the law, or by believing what you have heard? Are you so foolish? Having started with the Spirit, are you now ending with the flesh? Did you experience so much for nothing? If it really was for nothing, well then, does God supply you with the Spirit and work miracles among you by your doing works of the law, or by your believing what you heard? The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. That's a challenging passage, because I think we all tend to go back to the works part and try to earn our way, don't we? And works, we are supposed to do works, aren't we? Isn't that evidence of our faith, according to James? And anyway, this is week 40, Thursday of week 40. Rigor of devotion. Eros is self-salvation, egocentric. Agape is God's salvation, God-centric. Of course, this is in line with what Paul was just saying in Galatians. So all Eros systems are popular, for they leave the self intact at the center of things. This passage gives a picture of the Eros approach. These have indeed an appearance of wisdom in promoting rigor of devotion and self-abasement and severity to the body, but they are of no value in checking the indulgence of the flesh. That's Colossians 2:23. The system of Gnosticism against which Paul was writing had an appearance of wisdom, it seemed. It seemed to produce rigor of devotion and self-abasement, but it left the self at the center. I am producing rigor of devotion. I am abasing my body. The I was on parade very subtly, but still there, dressed in rigor of devotion to God and apparently specializing in self-abasement. The Christian faith does not demand rigor of devotion, as if God were a spiritual taskmaster, whipping his slaves to bend lower, to be more ardent and self-abasement before him. He does not want our worship, he wants our love. And if we love him, we will worship him, commune with him, for worship is communion. And the Christian faith does not demand self-abasement. For you can abase yourself and all the while be saying that deep down, look how wonderful I am to abase myself in this way. You can be proud of your humility. Attempts to gain salvation through lopping off here and lopping off there, giving up here and giving up there, humiliating yourself here and humiliating yourself there are vain attempts at getting rid of yourself through self-abasement. But Christianity does not teach self-abasement. It teaches self-surrender. Self-abasement may leave the self intact, abased, but still there, trying to assert itself through the self-abasement. But self-surrender does not leave the self intact. Self-surrender is self moving out of the center and letting God take the center. With the self on the margin, with God in control and the self in obedience. That puts God and you where both ought to be. Now, I think that Jones, another point, this almost sounds like this is a destruction of the self-surrender, because if the self-abasement leaves the self intact, I think that he's really saying this in place, in the center of your existence. But the self-surrender leaves yourself still fully yourself. It's just no longer at the center of your existence. And maybe I just don't want anybody to be confused by what that means, because it almost sounds like self-surrender is self-abasement. If you read it that way, I think it's that word intact, which he might be using in a different way than I would use. Intact, to me, intact means still whole, still complete, still, but that's not what he's saying. He's saying that it leaves it in place, in the same place. And self-surrender removes the full self out of God's way and puts God in the center. Anyway, here is our prayer for today. Father, I thank you that I can get rid of my pride in your way. Just take your agape love by self-surrender and my pride is gone, dissolved in your overwhelming love. There is simply no place for pride when with empty hands I take your gift. Amen. Our affirmation for the day: I do not whip up my will into worship. My grateful heart can do nothing else. Jesus is Lord.